The wrestling world came together to say their final goodbye to the legendary Hulk Hogan. In this exclusive coverage, witness the emotional moments as celebrities, family members, and WWE legends arrived at the memorial service. Under the soft, golden light of a Florida morning, the gates to Hulk Hogan's sprawling Clearwater estate swung open for the final time, not for another championship celebration, not for a reality TV taping, but for a farewell that no fan, friend, or family member had ever truly been ready for. The wrestling world, the entertainment industry, and even icons from beyond the squared circle gathered on this day to say goodbye to the man whose name had become synonymous with larger-than-life charisma, neon bandanas, and the immortal rallying cry, "What you gonna do, brother?" But as limousines and tinted SUVs rolled slowly down the palm-lined driveway, there were no booming voices or pyrotechnic displays. Only the hushed murmurs of grief, the sound of footsteps on marble, and the faint strum of an acoustic guitar playing Real American in the background. Inside the mansion's courtyard, transformed into a private memorial space, rows of white chairs faced a simple stage draped in red and yellow, Hogan's signature colors. At the center stood an open casket framed by towering arrangements of sunflowers, white lilies, and roses dyed gold. Above it, a massive screen played a loop of Hogan's most iconic moments, slamming Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, pointing to the heavens before delivering his leg drop, hugging Make-A-Wish kids backstage. Each clip drew quiet smiles through tears from the crowd, a bittersweet reminder of the energy he brought to millions. The first to arrive were family. His children, Brooke and Nick Hogan, walked hand in hand, their faces pale, eyes red from nights without sleep. Brooke, wearing a black dress with a single gold bracelet, her father's, paused at the casket and whispered something only he would ever hear. Nick, silent but trembling, placed a folded bandana inside, the same red one Hogan had worn during their last family barbecue just months earlier. Close behind came Jennifer McDaniel, Hogan's ex-wife, escorted by a family friend. Despite their history, the grief etched on her face was unmistakable, because no matter the ups and downs, Hogan had been a cornerstone in her life. Then came the wrestling royalty. Triple H, dressed in a dark suit but still carrying the commanding presence of a man used to arenas of 80,000, approached the casket slowly. His head bowed, he placed a replica of the WWE Championship belt across the edge, the nameplate reading Hulk Hogan, gleaming under the morning sun. Behind him, Ric Flair, his longtime friend and occasional rival, walked with a cane, his trademark sunglasses unable to hide the tears streaming down his face. Flair stopped, gripped the edge of the casket with trembling hands, and whispered, "You made me better, brother. You made us all better." He lingered there, shoulders shaking, before stepping aside for the next mourner. The line of celebrities stretched far beyond the wrestling world. Sylvester Stallone, in a tailored black suit, stood still for several moments at the foot of the casket, his jaw set in that familiar determined expression, but his eyes glistening. When he finally stepped forward, he rested his hand gently on Hogan's arm. "We fought different fights," he murmured, "but you were a champion every day." Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson followed soon after, his massive frame somehow looking smaller in the weight of the moment. Removing his sunglasses, he stood before Hogan in silence before speaking softly, "You paved the way for me, for all of us. I'll keep running that road, brother." The memorial wasn't just a star-studded goodbye. It was a gathering of generations whose lives Hogan had touched. Actors, musicians, athletes, and wrestlers young and old filled the seats. John Cena arrived quietly, shaking hands with Hogan's family before taking his place near the front. Roman Reigns, still recovering from his own recent health battle, wore a lei of white flowers, a Polynesian tribute to fallen warriors, and placed it gently over the casket. He closed his eyes for a moment, perhaps picturing the countless times Hogan had offered him words of encouragement backstage. As guests settled, the ceremony began with a live performance of Real American, stripped down to just voice and guitar, turning an arena anthem into a tender hymn. The air was thick with emotion, Even the Florida breeze seemed to pause in respect. The first eulogy came from Vince McMahon, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Terry Bollea wasn't just Hulk Hogan, he began, using Hogan's real name. He was a man who carried the weight of an entire industry on his shoulders and never let it crush him. He turned wrestling into a global phenomenon, and he did it by connecting with people, not as a character, but as a human being. After Vince, Brooke Hogan stepped up to the podium, clutching a piece of paper that shook in her hands. "I used to think my dad belonged to the world," she said, her voice breaking. "I saw the way fans lit up when they met him, how little kids would believe anything was possible because he told them so. But I also knew the man who made us pancakes every Sunday, who sang off-key in the car, who called me his little girl even when I was grown. That's the man I'll miss most." The room filled with muffled sobs. Even the most stoic faces couldn't remain unmoved. One by one, speakers took the stage. Ric Flair told stories of their days traveling together, pranks on the road, locker room laughs, heated matches that ended with hugs. Stallone recounted filming Rocky III with Hogan, remembering how Hogan's larger-than-life presence threatened to steal every scene, yet off-camera he was humble and generous. The Rock, his voice deep and steady, spoke of the first time he met Hogan as a young wrestler. "He looked me in the eye and said, 'Kid, you're gonna be bigger than me.' I didn't believe him then, but I carry that belief with me every day." In the back row, Kevin Nash sat with Scott Hall's widow, their hands clasped in silent solidarity. Shawn Michaels leaned forward, head bowed, praying quietly. Even younger stars like Seth Rollins, Becky Lynch, and Bianca Belair were in attendance, representing the new era that Hogan had made possible. Each mourner seemed to carry their own private reel of memories, matches watched, advice given, kindness shown when no cameras were around. As the ceremony moved forward, the screen above the stage shifted from wrestling highlights to personal photos. Hogan on the beach with his kids, grilling burgers by the pool, laughing at a backyard birthday party. The crowd chuckled softly at a shot of Hogan in an apron, flipping pancakes while wearing his championship belt. Those who had only known the icon were seeing the man, and it deepened the sense of loss. The atmosphere inside the courtyard was one of reverence, but also of shared connection. People who had once been rivals, even enemies, in the public eye embraced without hesitation. Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels, whose real-life feud was the stuff of wrestling legend, stood side by side, united in grief. Undertaker, in a rare appearance out of character, removed his hat and bowed his head for a full minute at the casket before taking a seat. When the final speaker, Hulk Hogan's longtime manager Jimmy Hart, stepped up, the crowd leaned in. Hart's voice wavered as he told the story of Hogan's last days, of how he faced illness with the same determination he had brought to the ring. "He told me, 'Jimmy, I don't want people to be sad when I'm gone. I want them to remember the fun, the smiles, the energy. Tell them I said, thank you for the ride, brother.'" Hart's words hung in the air like a benediction. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of waves from the nearby Gulf Coast and the rustle of palm leaves. Then, in a gesture that felt like something straight out of one of his epic storylines, the guests rose together and gave Hulk Hogan one final standing ovation. The applause was soft at first, then swelled into a thunderous tribute, echoing through the courtyard as if to send the Hulkster off with the energy he had given the world for decades. As the casket was closed and carried toward the hearse, people reached out to touch it one last time. Some with hands, others with roses or folded letters. Outside, fans gathered respectfully behind barriers, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Hulk," and "Forever our champion." The motorcade moved slowly down the drive, sunlight catching the gold trim of the casket as it disappeared beyond the gates. But the real goodbye lingered in the air, in the shared glances between old friends, in the stories whispered as people drifted toward their cars, in the quiet understanding that they had just witnessed the end of an era. For all the fame, the glory, the controversy, and the legend, Hulk Hogan had been, above all else, a man who made people believe in him, in themselves, in the idea that with enough heart, anyone could be a hero. And on this day, in Clearwater, surrounded by love and legacy, the immortal finally rested. After the casket left the courtyard, the crowd inside Hogan's mansion didn't disperse right away. It was as though no one wanted to be the first to step away from the place where so many memories hung in the air. Small clusters of people gathered, their voices hushed, sharing private stories that ranged from tearful to unexpectedly funny. These weren't the tales that made headlines, no championship wins or pay-per-view main events, but the quiet moments that defined Hogan as more than just the immortal. Triple H stood in a corner of the courtyard with John Cena, their heads bowed together in conversation. Triple H spoke softly, recalling the way Hogan had embraced him when he first broke into WWE, telling him that building respect in the locker room was more important than anything else. Cena listened intently, nodding, before offering his own memory, Hogan calling him backstage before Cena's first WrestleMania main event and telling him to make it feel like the biggest thing they've ever seen, because it's the biggest thing you've ever done. Cena smiled sadly. He had a way of making you believe you could carry the world, he said. Nearby, The Rock stood with Roman Reigns, their bond as members of wrestling's extended family evident in their shared grief. Roman adjusted the white lei he had draped over Hogan's casket earlier. When I was coming back from my health break, Roman said quietly, Hulk called me out of the blue. Just to tell me he was proud of me. No cameras, no interviews. Just a brother checking in. The Rock nodded. That's what people don't get, he replied. Behind the larger-than-life character, he was always watching out for the boys, for the business. Sylvester Stallone found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with Vince McMahon, both men uncharacteristically subdued. Stallone, who had been a Hollywood titan in his own right during Hogan's rise, told Vince about the day they filmed Hogan's scenes as Thunder Lips in Rocky III. He picked me up like I was nothing, Stallone said with a faint chuckle, but after the take, he asked if I was okay about 10 times. He had this presence, but he also had this kindness he didn't want anyone to miss. Vince listened, his usual executive demeanor softened. That's the part one hope people remember, Vince said. He was a showman, yes, but his heart was real. In another corner, Ric Flair, still leaning on his cane, was surrounded by Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, and Bret Hart, men whose paths had crossed Hogan's in every conceivable way, as rivals, as allies, as fellow road warriors. Flair, eyes still rimmed with red, recounted one of their final phone calls. He told me he wasn't scared of going, Flair said, his voice breaking. He was scared of leaving people behind without making sure they knew he loved them. That was Hulk, always thinking about the people around him. As the sun dipped slightly, casting a warmer glow over the courtyard, Brooke Hogan re-emerged, no longer at the podium but mingling among the guests. She hugged each person she passed, thanking them for being there. When she reached Dwayne Johnson, they embraced for a long moment. He believed in me, she whispered. Even when I didn't. Johnson squeezed her shoulder. He believed in everyone, he said. That's what made him so rare. The screen above the stage played a new video montage, this one more personal than the wrestling highlight reel. It showed Hogan teaching his kids how to ride bikes, carving a Thanksgiving turkey, dancing badly at a Christmas party. People laughed through their tears, the mood shifting into something warmer. It was a reminder that while the world had lost a legend, his family had lost a father, a friend, a constant source of joy and mischief. After the video ended, Undertaker rose from his seat and slowly made his way to the stage. The room went silent, as it always did when he spoke outside of character. We all have our roles in this business, he began, his deep voice carrying easily. Hulk's role was to make people believe in heroes. And he did that better than anyone. Not just for the fans, but for us in the locker room. He made you want to be better, bigger, stronger, not for your own ego, but for the people who believed in you. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. And now it's our turn to keep that alive. Following Undertaker's words, the guests were invited to share their own brief tributes if they wished. Some came forward, Kevin Nash recalling late-night gym sessions on the road, Bianca Belair talking about Hogan giving her advice on how to handle sudden fame, Chris Jericho sharing how Hogan once called him at 3 a.m. just to tell him he'd nailed a promo on Monday Night Raw. Others stayed in their seats, content to let their memories remain private. In the back, a small table had been set up with a guest book and framed photos of Hogan with fans from across the decades. The book filled quickly with handwritten notes, messages from WWE legends, Hollywood stars, childhood friends, and even neighbors who remembered him not as Hulk Hogan, but as Terry from Clearwater. A separate section was reserved for fans, and though the memorial was private, a few were allowed inside by special invitation. One young man, wearing a faded Hulkamania shirt, wrote in shaky handwriting, "You were my hero growing up. Because of you, I never gave up. Thank you, Hulk." The catering area was quiet, the usual post-service chatter replaced with reflective murmurs. On one table sat a small plate of Hogan's favorite snack, peanut butter and chocolate chip cookies, prepared by a longtime family friend. Some guests took one, smiling faintly at the thought that he would have teased them for getting crumbs on their suits. As the evening approached, the private service moved into a smaller, more intimate reception inside the mansion. The living room had been arranged with couches and armchairs, creating pockets of space for people to sit together and talk. The walls were adorned with memorabilia, title belts, framed magazine covers, and handwritten notes from fellow wrestlers. In one corner, a guitar leaned against a chair, one of the same guitars Hogan had been known to strum during downtime on the road. It was here that some of the most emotional exchanges took place. Roman Reigns, sitting with John Cena and The Rock, admitted, "I didn't realize until today how much he shaped the way we all carry ourselves. Not just in the ring, but in how we treat the people around us." Cena nodded. "That's his real legacy," he said. "It's not just the matches. It's the way he made you feel like you mattered." Sylvester Stallone sat quietly with Brooke and Nick, telling them about the early days of Rocky III. "He wasn't supposed to be in the movie at first," Stallone said. "But once he walked into the room, I knew he was Thunderlips. He didn't just play the part, he lived it. And that's the same way he approached life. He didn't halfway anything." Outside, as twilight settled over Clearwater, a small group gathered by the pool: Triple H, Vince McMahon, Shawn Michaels, and Ric Flair. They spoke in low tones about how the industry had changed, about the years when Hulkamania was not just a gimmick, but a force that kept the company alive. "We were all chasing him," Michaels admitted. "Even if we didn't want to admit it. He set the bar, and he set it high." As the night drew to a close, Brooke Hogan addressed the remaining guests one last time. Her voice was steadier now, though her eyes still shone with tears. "Dad always told me that the measure of a life isn't in what you take with you, it's in what you leave behind." Looking around this room, hearing all these stories, I know he left more than any of us could have imagined. He left love. He left laughter. He left a legacy that will live forever. Outside, the fans were slowly filtering toward the parking areas, but many stopped to leave flowers, photographs, and handwritten letters at the base of the memorial gates. The makeshift shrine grew by the minute, framed magazine covers from the 80s, replica belts with "Thank You, Hulk" scribbled across the gold plates in permanent marker, even a few action figures placed carefully in the grass as if standing guard. A man in his 60s knelt to place an original Hulkamania headband he'd worn to WrestleMania III. "It's yours again, brother," he whispered before stepping away, eyes glistening. Back inside, Vince McMahon had taken a seat in one of the empty front row chairs, staring at the stage. It was rare to see him alone at such an event, but for a few minutes, no one approached him. His mind seemed far away, perhaps replaying the early days of WrestleMania, when Hogan's star power had transformed the WWF into a cultural phenomenon. Finally, Triple H walked over and sat down beside him. "You know," Triple H began, "he made all of this possible. The arenas, the crowds, the global tours. Without him, we'd be a completely different company." Vince gave a slow nod, his voice low. "Without him, we might not have survived at all." In another corner, Hulk's longtime friends from outside the wrestling world gathered around Nick Hogan. Among them was Sylvester Stallone, wearing a simple black blazer and no sunglasses to hide the redness in his eyes. Stallone had known Hulk for decades, ever since casting him as Thunder Lips in Rocky III. "Your dad, he was a fighter in every way," Stallone told Nick, gripping his shoulder firmly. "Not just in the ring. In life. He took hits most people wouldn't get up from, and every time, he stood back up." Nick swallowed hard, nodding, and managed to reply, "That's the part of him I want to keep alive." As the crowd in the main hall began to thin, the family and closest friends were escorted to a smaller, private room for a final, intimate farewell. The room was quieter, lit by warm amber lamps instead of the stark stage lights, and in the center was a smaller table draped in Hogan's red and yellow colors. On it lay his iconic feathered boas, one red and one yellow, carefully folded. Brooke approached first, picking up the red boa and holding it close to her chest. "This still smells like him," she whispered to no one in particular. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. The private gathering soon became a space for unfiltered storytelling. Kevin Nash shared a story about a road trip gone hilariously wrong in the early 90s, where Hogan had managed to get an entire diner of strangers chanting "Brother" before their meals arrived. "He had that thing," Nash said, shaking his head. "That magic. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 100 new friends." Booker T added a more serious memory, the time Hogan had called him after a personal loss, just to talk for hours about nothing in particular. "That's who he was," Booker said. "He didn't just check in. He stayed in." Even in this private setting, the absence of cameras didn't change the raw emotion. Grown men who had spent decades building unshakable personas now sat with heads bowed, eyes wet. The strength they had shown in the public service earlier gave way to open vulnerability. "We're allowed to miss him," Shawn Michaels said quietly, almost as if granting permission to the group. "We're allowed to hurt." Meanwhile, outside the venue, the streets of Clearwater had taken on an almost festival-like appearance despite the grief. Food trucks had set up along the sidewalks, serving the kind of all-American meals Hogan himself loved: burgers, hot dogs, fries. With portions going to charity in his name. Fans swapped stories over meals, showing each other old ticket stubs and grainy photographs from meet and greets decades past. The sound of "Real American" played from a small speaker near the makeshift shrine, and each time the chorus hit, a few people sang along through their tears. Back in the private room, Brooke finally stood to speak to the group. She didn't return to the podium or address the crowd. This was just for them, the inner circle. "When we go back out there," she said, her voice steady now, "I want people to remember that my dad wasn't just Hulk Hogan. He was Terry Bollea. He was the man who made us laugh until our stomachs hurt, who'd drop everything to help a friend, who taught me that life is about more than winning, it's about showing up. And he showed up for all of us." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Undertaker, still standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. He removed his hat, a rare gesture outside the ring, and placed it gently on the table beside the boas. "Rest in peace, my friend," he murmured, and with that, the room seemed to collectively exhale. The private farewell was over, but the legacy it honored was far from gone. As the family prepared to leave, the memorial grounds outside were still alive with quiet tributes. Fans remained, lighting candles, leaving flowers, and sharing hugs with strangers. A young boy in a yellow bandana tugged at his father's sleeve and asked, "Dad, when will Hulk wrestle again?" His father knelt down, pulled him close, and said softly, "In here, buddy. He'll wrestle forever in here," tapping his son's chest. In that moment, it became clear that this final goodbye was not really an ending. Hulk Hogan, the man, the myth, the icon, would live on in the chants, the stories, and the countless lives he had touched, both inside and far beyond the wrestling ring. The memorial service had ended, but the spirit of Hulkamania would never fade. In the days that followed Hulk Hogan's memorial, Clearwater, Florida, seemed to carry a different kind of energy. The streets, still dotted with wilted flowers and faded tribute posters, had become quiet, but not silent. The echoes of the chants from the memorial, Hogan, Hogan, still lingered in the minds of those who had been there. Local businesses left their Hogan memorabilia in place. Restaurants kept photos of him on the walls, gyms hung his classic poses above weight racks, and shop windows displayed his action figures like sacred keepsakes. Even people who had never met him spoke about him as if he were family. In Stamford, Connecticut, the WWE headquarters was draped in black banners adorned with red and yellow trim, a visual representation of mourning and honor. For the first time in years, the company's flagship building played Hogan's entrance music on its outdoor speakers, just loud enough for passers-by to hear. Inside, meetings were held around the clock to coordinate tributes. Triple H, now the chief content officer, insisted that Hogan's next tribute show be unlike anything WWE had ever done, not just another video package before a match, but a night entirely devoted to the man who had transformed professional wrestling into a household phenomenon. Word spread quickly that the upcoming episode of Monday Night Raw would be dedicated to Hogan's legacy. Ticket sales, already strong, suddenly exploded, with fans clamoring to be part of what was being called the final ride of Hulkamania. WWE production teams worked tirelessly, pulling archival footage from decades past, some of it never before seen by the public. There were clips of Hogan backstage joking with crew members, surprising sick children with impromptu visits, and offering quiet encouragement to rookies long before they became stars. Each piece of footage was chosen to show the man behind the character, the one who carried his charisma beyond the bright lights. Back in Florida, the Bolia family kept their lives shielded from the public in the week following the service. Brooke Hogan largely avoided interviews, though she agreed to one brief conversation with a local paper where she described the surreal quiet in her home. "It's strange," she admitted. "You think the hard part is the memorial, but it's the days after that are the hardest. You wake up expecting to hear his voice or see him walk into the room with that big grin, and then you remember." Nick, more reserved than his sister, spent his time organizing his father's memorabilia in the family home: title belts, iconic ring gear, countless photographs. Each item carried a story, and as he placed them carefully into display cases, he found himself whispering those stories aloud, as if telling them to his dad one last time. Wrestlers, past and present, flooded social media with tributes. The Rock posted a lengthy video recalling his first meeting with Hogan. "I was a rookie, and Hulk walked up to me, shook my hand, and said, 'You've got the look, brother, now show them the heart.' That was Hulk. He made you feel like you belonged." Stone Cold Steve Austin shared a rare candid photo of the two backstage, captioning it simply, "Legends never die. Thanks for paving the way, Hulkster." Fans around the world found their own ways to pay homage. In Tokyo, a small wrestling promotion held a special 10-bell salute before their main event, with every wrestler wearing a red bandana in his honor. In London, a mural appeared overnight on the side of a brick building, depicting Hogan in his prime, ripping his shirt open as if ready for one last match. The image was so striking that even non-wrestling fans stopped to take photos. In Mexico City, Lucha Libre fans organized a charity wrestling event with proceeds going to children's hospitals, inspired by Hogan's long history of visiting sick kids. When Monday Night Raw finally aired its tribute episode, the emotion was palpable from the first second. The arena lights dimmed, and the Titantron lit up with the words, "In memory of Hulk Hogan, 1953 to 2025. The opening chords of Real American filled the arena, and thousands of fans stood, holding up signs and chanting his name. WWE superstars lined the stage, some in tears, all wearing commemorative Hulkamania Forever shirts. The first segment was a 15-minute video package. A sweeping journey through Hogan's career, from his AWA days to WrestleMania main events, to his WCW heel turn as Hollywood Hogan, and finally, his Hall of Fame induction. The crowd reacted to each highlight as if reliving it in real time, cheering his victories, booing his NWO betrayal, and roaring during his improbable comeback matches. Throughout the night, matches were punctuated with more tribute segments. Randy Orton shared how Hogan had given him advice early in his career that still guided him. "He told me, kid, your legacy isn't built in one night. It's built in every handshake, every fan picture, every thank you." And he lived that. Becky Lynch spoke about growing up in Ireland and watching Hogan on VHS tapes, how his energy made her believe that wrestling was more than a sport. It was a way to connect with people's hearts. The most emotional moment came near the end of the show, when the lights dimmed again and The Undertaker slowly made his way to the ring. He removed his hat, picked up a microphone, and after a long pause said, "You can't kill Hulkamania. You can't. Because it lives in every single one of us who stepped into that ring and every fan who ever believed. Rest easy, brother." He placed one of Hogan's boas in the center of the ring, draped over a folded championship belt, and walked away without another word. The crowd erupted in a sustained chant of "Thank you, Hogan," that lasted several minutes after the cameras cut to black. Meanwhile, in Clearwater, the family had gathered privately to watch the tribute together. Brooke later revealed that they all sat in silence for most of it, occasionally smiling at old footage, sometimes breaking down at unexpected moments, like seeing Hogan joke with ring crew during commercial breaks. "It wasn't just the big matches that got to me," Brooke said. "It was seeing him in those little moments, just being himself." The following morning, the family received a surprise delivery. Dozens of letters from fans, bundled together with a ribbon, sent by WWE headquarters. Each letter carried a personal story, from people who had met Hogan in person to those who had never seen him outside of a television screen, but felt as though they knew him. One read simply, "You were my childhood. Rest in peace, champ." Another, from a young boy, said, "I never got to see you wrestle, but my dad told me all about you. He says you were the greatest." The week closed with one final gesture. Clearwater City Council announced that the beach where Hogan had often been seen jogging in his later years would be renamed Hogan's Beachfront in his memory. The dedication ceremony was set for the following month, and fans from across the country were already planning to attend. "He always said Clearwater was his home," the mayor said at the announcement. "Now it always will be." The grief was still fresh, but as the days passed, the narrative began to shift from mourning to celebration. Fans didn't just talk about losing Hulk Hogan, they spoke about carrying him forward, about keeping Hulkamania alive in spirit. The man might have been gone, but the legend was proving to be immortal. In the weeks after the tributes and the WWE Memorial broadcast, the Bolia household in Clearwater slowly began to settle into a new kind of rhythm, one without Hulk Hogan physically present, but with his memory woven into every corner of the home. The red and yellow glow of his memorabilia seemed warmer now, not as sharp a reminder of loss, but as a constant reassurance that he was still with them in spirit. Every evening, Brooke would light a single candle beside the championship belt displayed in the living room. She said it made her feel like she was keeping the arena lights on for him, even now. Nick, meanwhile, found comfort in the smallest routines his father had loved. He took over Hogan's morning beach walks, often wearing one of his old bandanas and listening to the same classic rock playlists his father swore by. Locals began to recognize the habit and would wave from a distance or stop to share their own Hogan stories. Some told Nick about meeting his dad during autograph signings in the 80s, others about seeing him at the local diner buying breakfast for an entire table of fans. Nick kept a small notebook with him on these walks, jotting down each story. One day, he told Brooke, "We'll put these all in a book. Every single one. So no one ever forgets." Behind closed doors, there were still hard days. Brooke admitted to friends that she often reached for her phone to call her father after reading something exciting or needing advice. "Then I remember he's not on the other end anymore," she said quietly. But when those moments came, she turned to the vault of voicemails she'd saved over the years, Hogan's booming, "Hey, brother." Greetings, his gentle reminders to keep your head up, his random jokes about wrestling or life. She'd listen to one or two, let the tears come, and then find herself smiling. The WWE made it clear that Hogan's legacy would not be confined to a single tribute show. Plans were underway for an annual Hulk Hogan Legacy Night that would rotate between Raw and SmackDown each year, with proceeds from merchandise sales going to children's charities, echoing the work Hogan himself had done quietly for decades. Triple H personally called Brooke to discuss the concept. "Your dad gave everything to this business," he told her. "It's our responsibility to make sure the next generation knows exactly who he was, and not just in the ring." Brooke agreed immediately, offering to help select footage and share personal stories that showed her father's softer side. In Clearwater, the renaming of the beach to Hogan's Beachfront became a civic event bigger than anyone anticipated. On the day of the dedication, thousands gathered along the shoreline, many wearing Hulkamania shirts or feather boas despite the heat. The city unveiled a bronze plaque at the start of the boardwalk, engraved with Hogan's likeness and one of his most famous quotes: "Train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins, and you will never go wrong, brother." Brooke and Nick stood together as the plaque was revealed, both placing their hands on it as the crowd erupted into applause. For a brief moment, it felt as though Hogan himself might come jogging down the sand, flashing that trademark grin. In the wrestling world, his absence continued to be felt backstage. At house shows and televised events, wrestlers swapped road stories about Hogan in locker rooms, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with choked voices. Younger talent who had never shared a ring with him began studying old matches more closely, not just to see his moves, but to understand how he connected with audiences on a level few had achieved. "It wasn't about the leg drop," Sami Zayn remarked during an interview. "It was about how he made you feel when you walked out of that arena. You felt bigger, stronger, like you could take on the world. That's what I want to bring to my own matches now." One of the most touching moments came at a non-televised WWE live event in Tampa. Toward the end of the night, the lights dimmed and Real American hit the speakers. The crowd of several thousand roared to their feet, expecting a tribute video. Instead, a spotlight shone on an empty ring, where one of Hogan's signature feather boas lay draped over a turnbuckle. No one spoke. No one needed to. The fans filled the arena with chants of "Thank you, Hogan," until the music played out, leaving an almost spiritual quiet in its wake. The guests began to leave slowly, hugging one another as they made their way out. Outside the gates, a quiet crowd of fans still waited, holding candles and photos, some softly singing the chorus to Real American. It wasn't loud, but it was heartfelt and unplanned, communal tribute to a man who had once asked them all to say their prayers and eat their vitamins. Inside the now empty courtyard, the stage remained, the flowers still vibrant under the soft glow of the lights. On the big screen, one final image faded in: Hulk Hogan, mid-ring, cupping his hand to his ear, waiting for the roar of the crowd. The image lingered for a long moment before fading to black. And in that silence, you could almost hear it: the cheers, the music, the voice of the man himself, larger than life, forever etched into the hearts of those who loved him. Hulk Hogan had taken his final bow, but his presence was still here, in every tear, every smile, every memory shared. The immortal was gone, but the spirit of Hulkamania would live on forever. As the last of the formal guests stepped through the arch gates and the cameras that had been stationed discreetly at a distance packed away, a different kind of gathering began to form inside the Clearwater mansion. This was the circle Hogan's family and closest friends knew would matter most to him: the after hours, no publicity, no press group where stories could be told without worrying about how they might be clipped, spun, or edited for headlines. The air was softer now, no longer charged with the structured gravity of a memorial service. The suits were still on, the black dresses still pressed, but the atmosphere had shifted into something warmer, almost like a family reunion with an undertone of heartbreak. In the great room, with its high ceilings and walls lined with framed photos of Hogan's life, a semicircle of chairs was arranged around a coffee table covered in mementos. An old pair of yellow wrestling boots, a faded Hulk Rules t-shirt, the custom-made weightlifting belt Hogan had carried everywhere in the 80s. Brooke sat at the center, flanked by her mother Linda and her uncle, who was holding one of Hogan's famous red and yellow feather boas. He lifted it now and draped it gently over the back of her chair. "He'd want this here," he said with a small smile. Sylvester Stallone remained nearby, his voice gravelly with emotion. He told a story that had everyone leaning in. We were in the middle of filming Rocky III, and there was a scene where Thunder Lips was supposed to toss me over the ropes. Hulk was worried he'd hurt me, kept asking if I was sure about it. I told him, "Hulk, I'm a big boy, I'll be fine." But when the cameras rolled, he still eased me down like I was made of glass. That was the thing about him. He could play the toughest guy in the room, but he never wanted to actually hurt anyone. It wasn't in him. The Rock sat cross-legged on the floor beside Roman Reigns, both men sipping from small glasses of bourbon Hogan's close friend had poured as a quiet toast. "You know," The Rock began, "when I first broke in, Hulk wasn't just this legend to me. He was the legend. But the first time we met, he didn't act like it. He acted like I was important, like he had all the time in the world for me. That's rare in this business. That's why, even after all these years, I still call him brother. He made you feel like family instantly." Roman nodded, his gaze distant. "When I was out with my illness, I didn't hear from a lot of people. But Hulk called. And he didn't talk about wrestling. He talked about life. About fighting your way through things that feel impossible. He made me promise to keep showing up, not just for the fans, but for my family. I didn't realize until today how much I needed that call." In another corner of the room, Ric Flair and Vince McMahon shared a conversation that was less about Hogan's matches and more about the man behind the persona. "He could fill an arena just by walking in," Flair said, his voice low and steady, but in the locker room, he was the guy who'd sit next to the rookie and tell him he belonged there. That's leadership. That's why people followed him. Vince nodded, the normally unflappable executive's eyes glassy. "There will never be another Hulk Hogan," he said simply. The room's laughter came in waves when Kevin Nash stood up and told a story about Hogan's pranks on the road, swapping ring gear bags so a wrestler would discover they had the wrong boots halfway to the ring, or sneaking fake snakes into the gym bags of people terrified of them. "You never wanted to leave your stuff unattended if Hogan was around," Nash chuckled, "but even when he got you, you couldn't stay mad. That was his charm." Brooke leaned forward, holding a photo album in her lap. "Dad never kept a lot of his personal life private from us," she said. "He wanted us to see the highs and the lows. He said it made us strong. And even when the world seemed against him, he was never bitter at home. He'd still be in the kitchen making us laugh while he burned toast or got peanut butter all over the counter." She laughed softly at the memory, and several in the group smiled, the heaviness in the air lightening for a moment. Outside by the pool, the Florida evening had settled into a dusky glow, the water reflecting the orange and pink of the setting sun. John Cena had stepped out there with Undertaker, both of them standing in silence for a moment before Cena broke it. "You know, for all the big entrances and fireworks, this, right here, is how he'd want to be remembered. Surrounded by people he cared about, no cameras, no pressure." Undertaker grunted in agreement, his voice deep and certain. The man knew how to be larger than life, but he also knew when to just be a man. That's why I respected him. Meanwhile, inside, a quiet moment unfolded between Brooke and Dwayne Johnson. The Rock had asked to see one of Hogan's old guitars, and Brooke brought it from a side room. He strummed a few soft chords, then began to hum the opening of Real American. Gradually, voices joined in, not loud, not as an anthem, but as a lullaby for a man who had carried that song into arenas across the world. People smiled through their tears, swaying gently in time with the music. As the night deepened, smaller conversations sparked up again. Bianca Belair told Becky Lynch about meeting Hogan for the first time at a charity event and how he'd spent nearly an hour asking about her background, her training, her family. "He didn't make it about him," Bianca said. "He made it about you. And that's something I'll carry forward." Becky nodded. "That's how he left his mark. Not just with moments in the ring, but with moments like that, quiet, personal, unforgettable." A table in the corner had been set up with candles and small items guests could take as keepsakes: a piece of a Hulkamania bandana, a printed photo, a program from the memorial. Roman Reigns picked up a bandana, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "For the boys," he murmured. As the final hour approached, Brooke thanked everyone again for coming, her voice cracking with emotion. "Dad would be so happy to see all of you here," she said. "He'd probably be telling us all to lighten up and put on some Jimmy Buffett. But I know he'd also be proud of the way we came together tonight, not as wrestlers or celebrities, but as people who loved him." The guests began to trickle out into the warm Florida night, hugging each other tighter than usual. Outside the gates, the fans were still there, fewer now, but still holding candles, still singing softly. Some of the wrestlers stopped to shake hands, share a few words, even take a picture in honor of Hogan. There was no rush to leave. Back inside, Brooke remained in the great room alone for a while, the weight of the day settling over her. She ran her fingers over the weightlifting belt on the table, then over the t-shirt, the boots. Finally, she picked up the boa, draped it over her shoulders, and whispered, "Good night, Dad." In the stillness that followed, the house seemed to hold on to the echoes of the laughter, the music, and the countless memories shared that day. Hulk Hogan's chapter had closed, but his story was far from over. It now lived in the hearts of everyone who had gathered, ready to be told again and again, as long as there was someone to remember. The stories that unfolded in the hours after the memorial felt less like public tributes and more like intimate confessions. Snapshots of moments where Hulk Hogan wasn't the immortal or the real American, but simply Terry, a friend, a confidant, and a man with an outsized heart. In one of the smaller lounges off the main hall, Sylvester Stallone, Vince McMahon, and Dwayne Johnson sat with a glass-topped coffee table between them. On it rested a photograph from the set of Rocky III, Stallone and Hogan, both in costume, arms locked around each other's shoulders, smiling like kids who'd just pulled off the prank of the century. Stallone leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "We had this one day," he began, "where we were supposed to break for lunch, but Hogan refused to leave the set. He kept saying, 'Let's run it one more time. Let's make it perfect.' We ended up staying there for hours. And when we finally wrapped, he didn't go home. He came to my trailer, brought sandwiches, and just talked. About his family. About being on the road. He wanted to know everything about my life, too. That was the thing, he was curious. Genuinely curious about people." Vince, uncharacteristically quiet, nodded. He did the same in WWE. "People think we only talked business, but some of our best conversations had nothing to do with wrestling. He'd call me at midnight just to tell me about a book he was reading or a movie he thought I'd like." He was larger than life in public, but in private, he valued those little connections. Dwayne smiled faintly, his deep voice carrying a quiet reverence. "When my dad passed, Hulk was one of the first people to call. He didn't give me the usual condolences. He said, 'Brother, when you're ready, I'll tell you the stories your dad never did.' And he did. He gave me pieces of my father I didn't even know I was missing." In another room, Ric Flair held court with Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, and Roman Reigns. Flair's stories flowed easily. Road trips in the 80s, nights when the boys would wrestle twice in 2 cities and still find time to hit the gym together. One night in Chicago, Flair said, his voice warm with memory, "We'd just finished a brutal match. Everyone else went back to the hotel, but Hogan insisted we visit this children's hospital downtown. He didn't want cameras, didn't want press. We stayed there for hours, visiting every room, signing every autograph. That's the side of him people didn't always get to see." Shawn nodded. That's who he was. He understood the power of the persona, but he also knew the man behind it had a responsibility. Nash added with a smirk, and somehow, even in a children's hospital, he'd find a way to crack a joke that would make you laugh harder than the kids. By the fireplace in the main room, Brooke sat with her brother Nick and longtime family friend Jimmy Hart. Jimmy was holding a small velvet box, which he handed to Brooke. Inside was a gold necklace with a small lightning bolt pendant. "Your dad wore that on the road for years," Jimmy said. Said it was his good luck charm. Every time I asked him about it, he told me it reminded him to be quick, not just in the ring, but in life. Quick to laugh. Quick to forgive. Quick to show up for people. Brooke closed her fingers around it, pressing it to her chest. Then I'll wear it for him, she whispered. The smaller, more intimate setting allowed some of the younger generation to share their own stories. Bianca Belair spoke up, recalling the time she met Hogan at a charity event in Orlando. I was nervous, he was Hulk Hogan, you know? But he came right over, asked me about my braid, asked how I was adjusting to life on the road. Then he told me something I'll never forget: protect your joy, because that's what they can't take from you. I didn't realize then how much that would mean to me. Becky Lynch, sitting beside her, nodded. He had a way of making advice sound simple but powerful. First time I met him, he told me, "Kid, the crowd doesn't just buy your moves, they buy you. Don't ever let them think you're not worth the ticket." That stuck with me. Outside by the pool, Undertaker stood apart from the crowd, gazing at the still water. John Cena approached, his footsteps slow, respectful. He was one of the first to tell me to slow down, Cena said. Not in the ring, but in life. Told me to take more pictures, to spend more time with my folks, to make memories I could keep long after the lights went out. I think that's why this hurts so much. He was right, and now I wish I'd taken even more of that advice. Undertaker's voice was deep and final. He gave more than he took. That's rare. As midnight approached, the group inside grew smaller. Some had early flights, others simply couldn't carry the weight of the day any longer. But a core circle stayed. Brooke, Nick, Stallone, Flair, The Rock, Roman, Jimmy Hart, Vince, Nash, Michaels. They migrated to the kitchen, where someone had set out Hogan's favorite midnight snack, peanut butter on Ritz crackers, a habit he'd picked up during his early wrestling days. The sight of the simple plate brought a round of soft laughter, cutting through the heaviness just enough to let people breathe. Brooke lifted one cracker and held it up. "For Dad," she said. Everyone followed suit, the clink of crackers against one another oddly fitting in place of a glass toast. The Rock took a bite and smiled. He'd love this. He'd probably be mad we didn't make a whole mountain of them. Before leaving, each person took a final walk through the great room, pausing at the display of Hogan's memorabilia. Some touched the boots, others the belt, some simply stood in front of his framed photos for a long, silent moment. When The Rock reached the weightlifting belt, he ran his hand over the worn leather and said quietly, "I'll carry the weight now, brother." Outside, the Florida night had gone still. The fans who had been gathered beyond the gates earlier had left, leaving only the sound of waves rolling in from the nearby Gulf. As the last guests slipped away into the darkness, Brooke remained standing at the front door, the lightning bolt necklace glinting faintly against her dress. She closed the door softly, leaned against it, and let the quiet of the house wrap around her. Somewhere, deep in the walls, the echoes of the day, laughter, tears, voices raised in tribute, seemed to hum like a memory refusing to fade. And for those who had been there, this wasn't just the night they said goodbye to Hulk Hogan. It was the night they truly saw the man behind the legend, and vowed to keep his spirit alive in every ring, every stage, every life they touched. Because even in death, Hulk Hogan had done what he always did best: brought people together, made them believe in something bigger, and left them with one final reminder: heroes live forever as long as someone remembers their name. The morning after Hulk Hogan's funeral, Clearwater felt different. The Florida sun still spilled gold across the Gulf, the palm fronds still swayed in the breeze, but there was a quiet weight in the air, a sense that the city itself understood it had lost one of its brightest lights. Outside Hogan's mansion, the gates were lined with fresh flowers, new ones placed there in the early hours. Some bore notes from locals who had grown up seeing him around town, others from fans who had traveled thousands of miles just to be here. A laminated photo of Hogan holding the WWE Championship had been pinned to the fence, with a simple message scrawled in bold marker: "Thank you for my childhood." On Clearwater Beach, where Hogan had been a familiar sight jogging in the mornings or taking his boat out, fans gathered in small clusters. A few wore vintage Hulkamania shirts, some too faded to read, others pristine and bright yellow. Someone had set up a small portable speaker, playing Real American on repeat. It wasn't blaring, it was just loud enough to drift across the sand, blending with the crash of waves. Every so often, a group of strangers would share a hug, united not by knowing each other, but by the man they'd all come to honor. At a local diner Hogan frequented, the owner placed a reserved sign on his favorite booth, tucking a single red and yellow bandana over the backrest. Patrons came and went, some pausing to take a picture, others leaving a few dollars under the salt shaker as a tribute. The waitress on duty, who'd known Hogan for years, smiled faintly when asked about him. He always tipped big, but more than that, he always asked about your day. And he remembered. If you told him your kid had a soccer game, he'd ask next time how they did. The tribute wasn't confined to Clearwater. In Tampa, a massive mural of Hogan, originally painted years earlier, became a gathering point. People left candles, handwritten notes, and small wrestling figures at its base. Across the bridge in St. Petersburg, an arena that had once hosted some of his biggest matches lit its exterior in red and yellow for the night. The wrestling world responded in its own way. WWE posted a nearly hour-long tribute video on its social channels, blending footage of Hogan's most iconic matches with personal testimonials from wrestlers spanning generations. AEW stars, many of whom had never shared a locker room with Hogan, posted their own messages of respect. Whether you loved him or booed him, one tweet read, "You can't tell the story of wrestling without Hulk Hogan." Internationally, the ripples spread. In Tokyo, fans gathered at a wrestling-themed cafe, watching old NJPW matches Hogan had wrestled in the early 80s, chanting his name between sips of beer. In London, a group of fans organized a charity fundraiser in his honor, vowing to donate the proceeds to children's hospitals, echoing the kind of work Hogan had quietly done for decades. Back in Clearwater, Brooke and Nick Hogan stayed out of the public eye that morning, but neighbors said they could see people arriving at the house with food, flowers, and cards. The deliveries came from more than just wrestling royalty. They came from movie studios, sports franchises, musicians, and everyday people who had crossed paths with Hogan over the years. One bouquet bore a card signed by an entire NFL team, once a champion, always a champion. Later that afternoon, a group of wrestlers who had been unable to attend the funeral held their own private gathering in Orlando. Among them was Kurt Angle, who shared a story about facing Hogan in the ring. When you lock up with a guy like that, you feel the history in your bones. He didn't just work the match, he made it an event. And after it was over, he thanked me like I'd done him a favor. That same evening, the WWE Performance Center held a candlelight vigil. Trainees, many of whom had only seen Hogan on TV or in documentaries, lit small tea lights around a framed portrait of him in his prime. One young wrestler, voice trembling, said, "We're here because of him. He made wrestling bigger than it had ever been. He made it something you could dream about doing." Back in Clearwater, the beachside tribute grew as sunset approached. Hundreds gathered now, many holding candles that flickered in the warm evening breeze. A large speaker was set up, and someone began playing a slowed, acoustic version of Real American. People swayed in place, the song's familiar words taking on a new weight. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving tiny red and yellow flags. As the final notes played, an